The officers laughed as they slammed him onto the hood of the car, unaware of who he would turn out to be the next day. In the courtroom, their laughter was replaced by terror. Now he was the one deciding their fate. What happens next will shock even the most seasoned observers. But let's start from the very beginning. It was a Friday evening in the heart of the city. People hurried home, and the occasional car rolled down the well-lit street. Michael Carter, a 43-year-old black man dressed in a navy blue tracksuit, stepped out of a 24-hour supermarket, a grocery bag in hand. He was walking toward his car when the sharp screech of brakes made him turn around. A police patrol car pulled up at the curb, red and blue lights flashing, tearing through the silence of the night. A car door slammed, and out stepped Officer Jack Miller, a stocky, white man in his 40s with a cold smirk on his face. Beside him stood his partner, Ray Thompson, just as cocky, his expression indifferent. "Hey, you! Stay right there!" Miller barked, his hand resting on his holster. Michael stopped, raising his hand slightly. "Is there a problem, officer? You match a description. A suspicious guy was spotted in the area recently. What do you have in your pockets?" "I just came from the store. I can show you my receipt," Michael said calmly, slowly reaching for the paper. But Thompson had already stepped forward, snatching the bag from his hands. "What do we have here?" he muttered, pulling out a bottle of orange juice and a granola bar. "Wow, very suspicious." Miller chuckled. "What now? You a drug dealer? Or just a petty thief?" "I'm a lawyer," Michael said firmly. For a moment, the officers froze. Then they burst into laughter. "Oh yeah? A lawyer? Well, then I must be a senator." Thompson sneered, leaning toward Michael. Before Michael could respond, Miller suddenly grabbed his arms, twisted them behind his back, and slammed him face first onto the hood of the patrol car. "Hey, you have no right. Don't get smart, buddy. We decide who has what rights here." A few passers-by started to slow down, some pulling out their phones to record. "What did he do?" a woman in a blue jacket asked, filming. "Disturbing the peace," Thompson said dismissively. Miller snapped the handcuffs into place. "You'll spend the night at the station. Maybe you'll learn not to wander where you don't belong." Michael was shoved into the back seat of the police car. He remained silent, watching as the officers grinned, their faces twisted in mocking amusement. They had no idea this arrest would soon become their worst nightmare. The police station was anything but new. Worn-out furniture, the stale smell of cheap coffee, and an overwhelming sense that justice had little place here. Michael Carter sat on a hard chair in the interrogation room, his wrists still bound in handcuffs. Before him lay an empty table, one that had likely witnessed countless broken lives. By the door, Miller and Thompson whispered to each other, their voices muffled but audible. This guy even called himself a lawyer. Damn, their imagination knows no bounds. "Yeah, well, let him sit here for a few hours. Maybe he'll finally learn not to wander around at night." Michael said nothing. He simply sat and waited. More than an hour had passed when the door swung open, and a detective in a gray suit stepped inside. He was tall, with sharp features, holding a folder of documents in his hands. His voice was tense as he spoke. "Do you have any idea who you just arrested?" Miller scoffed. "Oh, great. Another one claiming he's got connections?" The detective slowly placed the folder on the table, flipped open the first page, and motioned for Thompson to step closer. "Read it. Michael Carter, federal prosecutor. Tomorrow, he is scheduled to lead a case against your police chief for corruption." Miller's face drained of color. "What?" Thompson swallowed hard. "We didn't know. He looked like... black?" The detective cut him off sharply. "You assumed that because he wasn't wearing a suit, he must be a criminal." Miller glanced at Michael, but he remained motionless, his face an unreadable mask of stone. "Take off his handcuffs, now." Thompson scrambled forward, hurriedly unlocking the metal cuffs. "Listen, Mr. Carter, this was a misunderstanding." Michael rose from his chair, flexing his sore wrists. "A misunderstanding?" His voice was calm, but there was something dangerous in it. "You mocked me, humiliated me, arrested me without cause, and now you want to just let it go?" Miller wiped sweat from his forehead. Let's talk about this. Maybe we can just forget it, huh?" Michael took a step toward him, tilting his head slightly. "We'll discuss it, in court, tomorrow." He turned and walked out of the interrogation room, his stride confident and unwavering. Behind him, the two officers stood ashen-faced, realizing that their careers now hung by a thread. The district courtroom was packed to capacity. Journalists, lawyers, and city officials had all gathered to witness the high-profile trial. At the center of attention was the case against the city's police chief, who was accused of corruption and abuse of power. Miller and Thompson sat in the back row, both nervous, exchanging glances. "He won't bring it up, right?" Thompson whispered. "I think he has more important things to deal with than us." Miller tried to reassure himself, though he didn't really believe it. But their worst fears were confirmed when the courtroom doors swung open, and Michael Carter walked in, wearing a perfectly tailored suit, standing tall and confident. He headed straight to his seat at the prosecution's table, casting a brief glance at the two officers. The judge took his place and banged the gavel. "Court is now in session." But before the main proceedings began, Michael stood up. "Your Honor, before we proceed with the case at hand, I have an important statement to make." The courtroom fell silent. "Last night, I was the victim of an unjust arrest by Officers Miller and Thompson. I was detained without explanation, subjected to verbal humiliation, and they abused their authority." Miller sank into his chair, and Thompson shifted uncomfortably. "I demand an investigation into these officers," Michael stated firmly. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. The judge frowned. "This is a very serious accusation, Mr. Carter. Do you have any evidence?" Michael nodded and pulled out a flash drive. "Yes, Your Honor. Eyewitness video recordings." The judge handed the flash drive to the court clerk, who inserted it into the computer. The large courtroom screen lit up with a video recorded by bystanders. Miller laughing. "What are you, a drug dealer?" Thompson smirking. "A black guy in a tracksuit at night?" "Yeah, definitely a lawyer." Miller twisting Michael's arms behind his back, shoving him roughly against the hood of the car. "You'll spend some time in the station. Think about your behavior." After the video ended, a heavy silence filled the room. The judge clasped his hands and looked at the officers. "Officers Miller and Thompson, do you have anything to say?" Miller opened his mouth, but the words got stuck in his throat. Thompson just lowered his head. The judge sighed heavily. "The police chief will stand trial for corruption. But now we have another case, abuse of power among his subordinates. Miller, Thompson, you will have to answer for your actions." At that moment, Michael Carter took his seat, knowing that justice was only beginning to unfold. The police station was tense. Conversations were hushed and no one lingered near the chief's office. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with fear. Police Chief Henry Collins, a stern 55-year-old man, sat behind his desk, glaring at Officers Jack Miller and Ray Thompson. In front of him lay a court order and termination letters. "I can't believe your stupidity." Miller tensed, but stayed silent. "You arrested a federal prosecutor without cause, humiliated him, and it was caught on video. Your faces are everywhere. You've triggered an investigation into the entire department." Thompson tried to protest. "Sir, It was a misunderstanding. Collins slammed the desk. A misunderstanding. Have you seen the footage? Reporters are outside. The whole country is watching. I have no choice. You're fired. He slid their termination letters forward. Badges and weapons. Now. Miller's hand shook as he unfastened his holster. Sir, please. We've served this city. Collins stared him down. If he weren't a prosecutor, you'd have done the same, right? Silence. Outside, cameras flashed as reporters swarmed. Miller, any defense? Thompson, was this racism? Do you realize you ruined your careers? Miller clenched his jaw, pushing through the crowd. Thompson avoided the cameras. They vanished into the city, leaving their reputations in ruins. Collins exhaled heavily and picked up his phone. Get me Prosecutor Carter. We need to talk.